Right, so I'll stop saying anything then.
Well, we can trim off the beginning and end.
So are we going to invite people in?
Yeah, I'll do that now. Admit it all. So we've got 4 people coming in.
Give everybody a couple of minutes. Hi, everybody.
Welcome, folks. Great to see you. Or not see you yet.
No, not yet. End of the day, they might want to put the cameras on.
I know that feeling. Hi, Catherine.
Todd may well have done some speed reading today.
Hi, Grace.
We all right? You can turn your microphones on if you want to say hello.
Hi, I have to apologise. I've actually left the book at my school. I've just realised I've got home and I've left the book at school.
Yeah, well, you know, that is even. Do you even have a copy?
I do.
Don't worry. You have to apologise. I'm not checking up on homework. I'm not going to ask you. So, what did you do for task 14.1? In fact, I've already been making some notes about thinking about the 5th edition. So, yeah, we were having that conversation, weren't we, earlier in the week?
Yeah.
About the 5th, yeah.
It's like painting the 4th bridge.
Yeah. Well, I'll kind of drop into the conversation. I like to do a little bit of name checking. So I was talking to somebody at Ofsted today. There you go. So you can take this back to your schools. You've got it from the horse's mouth. And obviously the focus from Ofsted is around curriculum and looking at curriculum. And it did get me, I kind of thought I need to mull over about the 5th edition. It's about bringing the structure of D&T curriculum more to the fore than it is, because currently it's in the 3rd section. You know, we're kind of heavily, I had to have a debate when I was putting the book together. Do I put the subject knowledge bit as the 2nd part, or do I put that as the 3rd part to kind of think about the priority? So it's cracking. I might do a whole complete restructure of the book.
Yeah, that makes sense. To put curriculum first, and then it's rather I said, beginning with the subject.
So I'm gonna put that in my notes for the 5th. I've already got a note in Evernote about this 5th edition.
Excellent. Okay, so we've got 5 with us now, so maybe a few minutes.
Well, Amy can't make it, so that's why we are recording the session, folks. But the video will only be available to everybody who's part of the group. I suppose though, Matt, so I'm just thinking out loud here about this 5th edition. I'm just thinking that the book, the audience for the book are people like we've got here, student teachers, early career teachers. And so the book's got to be framed right for them, not what we think.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. It's not about us. Okay.
Yeah.
We've got a hello from Todd in the chat.
Oh, hello, Todd.
Anybody else? I presume some people are in spaces where they don't want to turn or can't turn cameras on and things like that. Yeah. Okay, should we make a start?
Yeah, sure.
Go on then, Matt. I'll let you kick off.
Okay, so fantastic to see you guys again, and thank you for coming on this darkening evening. So we've got Alison talking to us today about planning for progression in D&T. So in the previous sessions we looked at, well, what is D&T? Then last session we looked at planning and pedagogy in D&T, and this is sort of starting to put it all together. And I'm thinking about, well, what about beyond the lessons? So if you've got any questions, then do post them in the chat, or at the end when there's opportunity for questions, you can ask them as well. But if any questions come to mind, pop them in the chat. A bit of a notice to give to you. There's a free event next Tuesday at 4:30, the D&T Association's 2nd research meet. We've got Remke Klapwick, who is a Dutch teacher educator who's written a lot about design learning and design thinking, and Alison is doing a slot on that as well, on how to find and read D&T research. So it is free, it's an hour long, it's online. So yeah, do have a look at that if you're free. Tell your friends and your colleagues about it, because we're trying to build these in and have them all.
And I was going to add into that, Matt, that Remke, we're going to draw on her work in the session when we talk about assessment.
Yeah.
You know, we've put that up there. So if you come to the research session next week, you'll get the true story from the horse's mouth. It's not making any comments about what Remke looks like, but it's, you know, you'll get it from Remke, and then when you come to that session, you'll get the possibly slightly mashed up version from us, because obviously it's not our research, it's our sort of interpretation. But yeah, they're really good sessions, the research meets, and you get to meet people, and very, you know, another way of doing it's a good networking. You get to, you know, and you get to be seen as being, you know, new people are interested in the subject. So that's good. That's good to do.
Excellent. So over to you. Okay.
Right, I'll leave you hovering in the background, and I'm going to share this PowerPoint. Hopefully we can all see that I've kind of flitted on already. Okay, so we're looking at chapter 14. I've kind of put in the PowerPoint all of the aims from the book, but I don't think we've really got time to go through all of these. And, you know, and as ever, you know, just chip in, okay? Don't hold back about your questions. If we start, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of kind of unpicking different things that are happening for you at the moment in your teaching, but you know, if there's things that you think that are kind of useful for everybody, so there's a question there that you've got that's burning that might be useful for everybody, then, you know, do post it in the chat and we can pick it up as we're going along. So these are kind of 4 things around the chapter. Let's keep going forwards, hopefully. Right, so the first thing we're going to look at, right, go back, end of the day, about this concept of design and technology capability. Now, this is something that is really not talked about, I don't think, very much in design and technology. I kind of feel like saying any longer. It used to be at the very heart of the subject. And when you think about what is design and technology capability, people used to be able to talk about this, which is why, you know, it's in the chapter and it's in the previous 3 editions, but sort of seems to get lost. It's kind of like it's, you know, as I said earlier, I was talking with the HMI for curriculum this afternoon, and we were talking about what is the curricular objective of design and technology? What's the point of the curriculum? Where's it leading to? And what we're really doing in design and technology is developing pupils' D&T capability. That's what all of our curriculum moves are about. And it has these 3 parts to it, okay? Active, purposeful application of knowledge and skill. So that means that children have to know some knowledge and skills to be able to use them and use them with a purpose. Okay, so it's not kind of just random, it's with a purpose. It's the movement of thought into action. So if you've looked at any work by Kay Stables and Richard Kimball, when they have the hand and mind triangle, you know, so it's things from, we think about things in our mind, we think about design, and we sketch them or we make them, that kind of back and forth. And it's the simultaneous use of both thought and action. So they're not always discrete. Sometimes this can be happening together as we're modeling and shaping things. Okay, so that's kind of what we're about. But when we start to think then about how does that happen, how do we plan it, we kind of need to plan it in quite a purposeful way. Because what happens sometimes, I think, in design and technology, when we're planning a series of lessons, we say, well, this is a theory lesson, this is a design lesson, this is a practical lesson. So these bits are all scattered all over the place. Well, you know, you may have heard of the concept of schema, where when we teach new knowledge, new skills, new ideas, we need to kind of help children make those connections with things that they've learned before. So we need to give them a picture as they're learning these different skills. And they're using and developing this D&T capability. And so sometimes they have knowledge and skills that might well be quite straightforward, that we've taught them quite, and that therefore they're only able to use them in quite a limited way, a basic way. And so their bigger picture is something quite simple like this out of all the building blocks. It's how do these building blocks that we're teaching them of knowledge, skills, understanding, how do they come together, and they use them to kind of construct something else. But then sometimes it might be something that's quite complicated. There's all these building blocks that they have to draw on. But we have to know when we're planning, how we're planning it in these different stages, that it's being built up, and that the children know how these things connect together, how they connect in different ways, and how they can draw on them to create different things and design different things. So how do we know what this looks like? What makes it good? Okay, how do we see it in practice? Well, this is what it will look like really when we start looking at a pupil who's got developing D&T capability. But I think first of all, what we'll see is that they use developing knowledge and skills in a creative and purposeful way. So you can see how that links to the idea about design and technology capability, that it's developing. So we don't have to give them all of it. So if we're thinking about progression, developing their D&T capability, so they have an increasing base of knowledge and skills, we have to kind of give them that in design and technology at pertinent points. I remember sort of teaching lessons about metals, and I teach them all about bronze and copper and such. And I think, I look back and I think now, well, we didn't use bronze, so why did I need to teach them about that? Okay, so it's thinking about, and so when they're given that knowledge, they've got nothing to hang it on, to hold it onto, apart from maybe there's some of the concepts around ferrous and non-ferrous and so on. But what we need to be thinking about is how they're given that knowledge to then use it in this purposeful way, in a creative way. So that's the first thing to think about when we're teaching knowledge and skills, and we're thinking about developing D&T capability. Do they need it now? Do they need that specific knowledge, or do they need some concepts around it? And then in developing their D&T capability, what we're looking for is for them to take responsibility for the form and direction of their work. Now, they're not going to do that all the time in a way where they're making all of the decisions and taking all the responsibility, and they're given free direction. That's part of your role in terms of planning progression. How much responsibility are you allowing them? When are you allowing them to take responsibility, and when aren't you allowing them to take responsibility? Because that then allows them, if they're taking responsibility and making decisions, which I'll come on to in a moment, that they can then modify their work as a result of that, because they're looking back, they're looking at what they're doing, they're questioning what they're doing. And because they have this developing knowledge and skills, they can reapply it, readjust it, learn more as they start to see, oh, I've got that gap. Or you might deliberately teach them things because they've got that gap in their knowledge, for them to be able to not now only reflect, but then take it forward into making informed judgments about how their design or their manufacturing or both parts of it need to move on. Okay, so this is what we're kind of looking for in terms of this developed D&T capability, and that they can handle uncertainty. Right, so you might not give them much uncertainty at some stages, but you might give them deliberately more as they maybe get older, or as it's later in the year, or they might be revisiting something. So you might give them, a material in one form, and then exactly the same material but in a slightly different form. So they're now handling the uncertainty. Will it act and react and behave in the same way? So when we're thinking about progression, we can't just go, well, we're just planning a series of lessons. We've got to think about, what are we trying to develop? What's the curriculum objective of this? Where are we trying to get to that makes design and technology what it is? And my belief is that what we're doing is we're developing their D&T capability, and these are some of the characteristics of the things that we're developing, and so we have to give them opportunity to do that. So I think that's a really important thing for you to get to grips with when you're thinking about planning for progression. And in chapter 14, I talk about this in more detail, and I give you some references, and there's a task to do. Who was it that said they'd left the book at home? Grace, right? So task 14.1, next time report back exactly what you've done for this one. Okay. Sort of thinking about how you're developing it over time, and what you don't develop children's D&T capability in the short term. You develop it in the long term, but you need to have short and medium term plans that feed into that long term plan. So that's why, as you become more confident, more experienced, you need to know where the curriculum is going. What's it doing? What's it looking at? You're trying to develop these children so they are autonomous, that they can plan, investigate, research their own projects. Okay, that's kind of a real key rationale. And you might say that's what we're working them towards the NEA, the contextual challenge. Let's just leave the GCSEs to one side at the moment. All right, let's not be driven by the qualifications. Let's think about we're developing children's design and technology capability. Okay, and so let's just go back again and let's pick up some of these keywords. It's developing knowledge and skills. Okay, so it's not all of the knowledge and skills, but they're still developing it. So you can be developing their D&T capability in year 1 in YR. Okay, I know we're talking about secondary, but what I'm trying to say here is let's not think about, we just do this in Key Stage 4. No, we have to develop their D&T capability over a long period of time. We have to do it in a purposeful way with our planning so that they can do all of these things as they are going, and they have to kind of grow into it. And the way you do it in your planning is you think about where are you giving them these possibilities. So where are you teaching them knowledge and skills that they can draw on in a activity where they are developing their D&T capability because you've planned that, but also though at the end you can assess how much their D&T capability has developed. Okay, so that's a really important concept to get your heads around, is this thing about D&T capability. So then long-term planning becomes a really important part of this, and we need to think about what that might look like in practice. So the place of long-term plans, and we need to have long-term plans, and at the stage, I know some of you are further on in your D&T teaching careers than others, but the stage where you might be an early career teacher, you're not necessarily going to have you're not going to be writing long-term plans. These are really done quite collaboratively. Now I've gone and pinched one of Matt's slides from the last session, because what I want to say is, whilst we're developing children's D&T capability, and we need to be planning that in a long-term plan, how we do it in terms of practice, in terms of what the different types of activities or aspects of it within that, we need to think about, well, is everything a design and make project? Matt talks in his chapter, and talked with Sarah last time about that these different ways of thinking about it. So are there some activities that we do that are mainly making? Well, we're going to give them some choices, but they're not necessarily design choices. So there's somewhere it's mainly designing, and so on. So there's these different ways of thinking about it. And so when you're thinking about a long-term plan, thinking about developing their D&T capability, when are you using these 4 different pedagogical approaches within design and technology? Now, an obvious way of thinking about it is, well, we're going to do at least one design and make in a year. Okay, so we might do one in years, so we do one in year 7, 8, 9, and 10 and 11. Obviously, the ones in year 11 would be a contextual challenge, would be the NEA. But then in year 7, it might come, they all might come towards the end of an academic year, a school year, and they might have, increasing degrees of complexity and increasing degrees of choices that the children can make as their D&T capability is growing. It might build on knowledge and skills that they've learned in that current year or in previous years. You might do things in year 9 that build on year 7. And you might do, so if you're doing a design and make every year, which is really kind of one of our central tenets of the subject, you might do some mainly making activities. It might only be 4 weeks or 5 weeks. Okay, you might do some mainly designing where you're developing their design skills. And Matt and I were talking about this conflation between design and communication. Mainly designing is about developing their design skills, and communication skills are kind of a subset in a way of that. So we think about, and I can even think about having a plan on a wall that's the 5-year plan or the 3-year plan and a 2-year plan. And I know schools do 2-year Key Stage 3, but it's not right. But anyway, there we go. That has been recorded, but don't share that beyond here. Well, Ofsted don't like 2-year Key Stage 3s. You'd have this plan, and you'd be able to pinpoint where you might be doing these four different types of pedagogical approaches and what contribution they are making to developing the children's D&T capability. And underneath that, you would also know where you were teaching them knowledge, where you were teaching them skills, and where they were revisiting them or not, depending on whether it was hierarchical or cumulative, over the period of those 3 or 2 or 5 years, however you wanted to phrase it. So long-term planning would have these things in it, and it would ensure there's progression and coherence. So it's not just kind of like, oh, here's a block, right, we're going to do. This is why there's a challenge about rotations, because in rotations it's really hard to ensure progression and coherence unless you have a tight team that have discussed what you're progressing in, and you have this understanding about D&T capability. Okay, you have to understand the nature of knowledge in design and technology. Okay, and that's not about knowing facts. Okay, there are things that we know in design and technology because we've done them, because we handle a material, because we see things, because we experience things. I was talking with some colleagues this morning about empathy. So how do we have empathy? How do we understand different people's positions? That's kind of a form of knowledge. And these long-term plans are usually written collaboratively. You won't do this on your own unless you're a single-person department. But I would hope if you're a single-person department, you're able to reach out and find others to work with. Now, I've put on here a kind of a graphic. It's a snapshot from a textbook, it's not a textbook actually, it's a book for teachers that was written back in the mid-1990s from the Royal College of Art project. And I think this is as relevant today as it was then. The design and technology curriculum, I believe, is very much based on a spiral curriculum. Okay, so where we have these concepts, and I'll send you all a link to the PowerPoint so you can see this in closer detail. Where we have these concepts that are the columns that run through. Okay, so we have, for example, generating ideas. Well, there's lots of different ways of generating ideas, and we might build on those over a number of different years with children. We might give them one way and another way and a couple of different ways. Okay, so that when we are developing with them a more and more complex situation, they have a greater number of skills and strategies to draw on as they are going through the years. And so their ideas become more complex, maybe more creative, maybe more unusual, maybe making wider connections with things that are beyond their sort of normal known world, because we've thought about what are the things that we are developing, these kind of vertical columns, and then when do we revisit them as we spiral around these over this has got all four key stages on here, but this might only just have one on it. Okay, and I wouldn't necessarily take as read the things that are written on the ribbons of the spiral, but I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about it and thinking about planning for progression is what are the things that we have to revisit? When do we revisit them? How do we revisit them? And what are we doing with things that we're building on? Okay, so previous things that children have learned. So you might, for example, teach in year 7 about properties, about something being ductile and durable, for example. I'm thinking material anyway. And then you might add other properties in other years as you as you show the children that there are conflicting properties around materials. So you're handling that complexity for them in your planning, okay? So if your mind has already exploded, that's absolutely fine, because planning for progression is hard, okay? Our subject is complex. All school subjects are actually complex. But this thing about what's the curriculum objective, what are the things that we are building on over time, okay? So Christine Council might call that hierarchical. What do they need to know first before they know that, So what kind of builds up? And then what are the things that are cumulative, that are almost, kind of next to each other? You don't need to know that before you know that. Okay. And that's really important for you to think about when you're planning, because and it really makes a big difference to your teaching, because I think one of the challenges is when we introduce something new, for example, teaching children how to use a sewing machine, okay, or teaching children how to use a pillar drill. All right, so we're talking about something that's quite complex. Both of those bits of machinery are quite complex machines. What do they actually need to know then? Okay, and then what might they need to know later? So, for example, on a pillar drill, and it's very similar on a sewing machine, there's different. You can change the speed of the machine depending on the size of the drill. Well, do children in year 7 need to know that? No, they just need to know, really, I've got to hold my work, this spins, it's got a sharp point on it, and as I pull it down, it will drill a hole, okay? And they need to know some very clear things about health and safety. It's the same thing with a sewing machine. And I have an apprehension about things like the sewing machine license, because I think it's trying to do everything. Whereas really what tends to happen when we start using sewing machines in year 7 is that the bobbin will already be in place, the machine will be threaded. I know machines, threads break and so on. I sew, so I kind of understand all of that. But Matt might talk about just in time, right? What do you need to know beforehand? Okay, well, you need to know about the pedal, you need to know about the safety, you need to know about the foot. Okay, you're probably only in year 7 going to teach them about stitching in a straight line. Okay, to begin with. Do they need to know about the thread breaking? No. Do they need to know about tension? No. Okay, because the machine could be set up. If something goes wrong, and I'm hoping Matt might jump in here and remind me what his 3 different types of demonstration are.
Yeah, we've got front loaded, which is doing everything together. We've got just in time, which is doing in stages, breaking it down. And we've got after failure. Right,
so thank you very much, Matt. So Matt's written a paper about this. So if the thread then breaks, sorry, I'm kind of going a bit deeper than into progression here, but I think it is all important to help you think about what you teach when. You wouldn't actually teach, you don't need to teach about the thread breaking until the thread breaks. Because if you do everything front loaded, the children it's just too much. So that's why your understanding of your subject knowledge, and we're going to talk about this in the next session about subject knowledge, your understanding and being able to break it down into concepts is really important when you're thinking about planning for progression. Because you're the one that holds this stuff, okay? You're the expert, and you're the expert about subject knowledge. And you're also the expert about developing their D&T capability over time. So you need to think about all these things in your planning. So I've kind of gone a little bit about sewing machines and pillar drills, but it's kind of to show how much do they need to know, okay, at that stage. What do you do to push them? And what do you about building in these opportunities, about being able to make decisions, reflect, make judgments, draw on knowledge. What knowledge do they need? I mean, one way of doing it at the beginning of a design project or a mainly making activity is say, what do you need to know? To be able to do this, what do you need to know? Sit down in a group, put them in groups and ask them to think about it. Well, that's actually helping them make informed judgments. You're empowering them to make decisions and to inform what they need to what we need to know about to be able to move on. Anyway, so that's a spiral curriculum. It came from the Royal College of Art work from the 1990s. I think it's really powerful if we think, how do we go round, you know, and it's thinking about being able to ask yourselves, if we're teaching this in year 8, why are we teaching it in year 8? What does it build on in year 7? And what does it inform into year 8? Okay, and how is this part of them developing their D&T capability? Okay. So then that leads us on to a medium-term plan. Now, I'm using the word medium-term plan. You might call them units of work. You might call them schemes of work. All of these things, I mean, I'm presenting these things as if they're, you know, all beautifully separate. You would write your long-term plan, and then you do a medium-term plan, then you do your lesson plans. Well, we kind of know that in reality as well, that life is messy. We have to do this around, well, what kit do we have? What timetable slots do we have? What expertise do we have? Excuse me, but having this curricular objective of developing D&T capability is central. And so, although I'm presenting these things in a linear way, you might find that you're looking at medium-term plans whilst you're looking at long-term plans. And you could hear me doing it when I got onto my little roll about sewing machines and pillar drills. So how do medium-term plans work? So as I said, you might talk about them in different ways. You can see that I've deliberately not used the language that it's a project. Okay, I've deliberately not used that language. Okay, because this is about progression. The project, the design and make project, the main design project, they're kind of like the tool, the instrument, the mechanism. They're not the plan. They're not what it is that you are progressing. Okay. Sometimes it can be several weeks or a full term or a year. They are cohesive series of lessons. So go back and have a look at Sarah's chapter, chapter 12 about lesson planning. And they often relate to projects or activities. So we're gonna, you know, they do map to that, but they don't have to map to that. The challenge I find is if we, excuse me, if we do map things, if we do call them by projects, then we get focused on the outcome of the project, not the process that the children are going through in developing their D&T capability. And the centrality of D&T capability kind of gets lost because we're focused on a knick-knack. I'm glad this isn't going to be, I stopped before I said the final word. You know, when we're not, you know, and we don't always have to produce an outcome in design and technology. We can't afford to in school budgets these days, but equally we don't need to. That's why we have these different pedagogical approaches. So what I'm going to talk you through, and I'll share this unit of work. This is a unit of work that Sarah and I did a few years ago, quite a few years ago now, for a school. And so what we have here is in our medium-term plan. We've actually taken the national curriculum. This is the current national curriculum for D&T, and we've numbered all the different subheadings that are within the curriculum. Oh, actually, no, I'm looking at this and thinking this is the old curriculum. Okay, all right, and we've put letters so we can make sure that we're ticking things off, so we know where things are being covered. So that's just a checklist, really. And what we've said here in our medium-term plan is we've given the big task. Okay, so you can see that we're focusing on developing design strategies. They're going to manufacture as a group. They're not manufacturing an individual product here. We're introducing the idea of standard components. Now we're doing that for two reasons. One, talking to them about standard components, so they're not manufacturing everything. And secondly, it makes the classroom management easier. Okay, so we've thought about where we're introducing something, but we've also got a practical reason, and it's a year 7 lesson scheme. We've identified what they have known. Now, this school was working on rotations. We were doing some consultancy for them. They've done a 3-lesson transition activity where they've learned some basic tools in 2D design. and they've been introduced to the laser cutter. And when I say they've been introduced to basic tools, we actually determined which tools they were learning to use in 2D design. So they were learning to use straight lines, connected lines, circles. That's it. The attach tool and something else. You know, we were really clear. Okay, so thinking about, we weren't overloading them with every single aspect of 2D design. Because the school worked on a rotation, we had to understand what they'd done before they came to us in the second term, so we could build on that. Okay, now we've put in ... because we were working in isolation on this, but we wanted to recognize and get this department thinking about, well, what have they done before? So a good medium-term plan understands the context. And now I've shown you about the spiral curriculum and D&T capability. We would really now put more stuff in this big picture section. Okay, we might even reference what we're focusing on in developing their D&T capability, thinking about what parameters we're putting in place so that we're aware of what we're focusing on. And so then when we've broken it down week by week, so this is just kind of like the headlines, and Sarah Davis and I sat and did this, and it's 19 sessions long, and I will say it took us 12 hours between us to write this, okay, because we thought really carefully about what we were doing in each lesson, how it would build up. We were linking it to the national curriculum. We were clear about resources. We kind of get going backwards and forwards, playing around with the order. Was this right? Were we doing the right things? We wrote the lesson objectives. We knew what we were doing. These SRTs and such are based on the Nuffield resources. So we kind of thought about all of that in detail. So, and again, I'll share this plan with you. But just to give you an overview of what this plan was about, and I think Sarah actually references it in her chapter as well. What it was year 7 biodiversity. We were focusing on designing and make. It was a full design and make project. And what we were asking the children to do was design and make a biodiversity product suitable for sale in a garden centre. So the whole idea was about things to hang in the garden, right? So the standard component was the hanger, so we could hang it off something. So they had to work from that could be hung up to attract beetles, insects, bees, and so on into a garden. So we kind of set the context. We gave them some links to videos about garden centres so they could understand about thinking about selling things in the garden centre. Then we did some primary research about what was biodiversity. We kind of put in some pedagogical approaches there. We then did some product analysis. We brought some products in that were related to biodiversity that they could use, that they could then get some of the understanding about this area. And then we started to get them to do, and I haven't got the whole scheme of work up here. The idea was that we then got them to think about, so I'm kind of waffling here a bit, I don't want to catch my breath. Thinking about, they did some individual design work, and we gave them a particular design strategy for that. And then we taught them a design strategy for selecting and developing design ideas. We then actually would bring them into groups, and as a group, we gave them a strategy for selecting and developing an idea for the whole group. So each group actually only worked on one product, one design in the end. So over time, we were teaching them different design strategies, different strategies for selecting which design to take forward. We did a standalone activity where they made the hooks. They all made exactly the same hooks, so they got some workshop experience. And then in their groups, so we've given them a limitation on what the materials were that they could access. In their groups, they then had to work out how they were going to make, in this group of 4, this one product. They were going to make 4 of them, and they actually made them as a production line. So each person took on a different part of manufacturing the final design. So they actually ended up with, on their table as a group of 4 identical products. So if you say got 20, 25 children, you might have 5 or 6 different products in the room. So that makes your classroom management better, easier. But also they still get a product each. They've all had an input into the design because of the design strategies that you've given them. And you've managed it by controlling the materials that you're allowing them to use. Okay. So it meant that at the end, the actual final session was actually we created a display in the school foyer, as if it was a shop in a garden centre. And because you had 4 products, you had 4 on the shelf. Okay. So the emphasis in this scheme is more about design skills than it is about us all doing something individually when it comes to making. Okay, so think about how that is prioritizing different aspects of developing their D&T capability. We also did some work underneath that as well about how you would assess a group activity. And because we were doing quite a lot of individual stuff, actually that was quite straightforward. So I just wanted to share that as a way of explaining how you can think about combining design technology capability, long-term planning into medium-term planning, how you can think about a rotation and this big picture and the week by week and mapping it to the national curriculum is all really helpful. The national curriculum as the basis of the knowledge and skills that you need to teach is really helpful if you start to think about where you're prioritizing. So doing things like long-term and medium-term planning is really complex. I'm just going to move on briefly to this last part of the chapter where I talk about where pupils are individuals. Now, I've taken a slightly different tack to how this has been written previously in the book. Previously, it's kind of focused on things around special educational needs, gifted and talented, which is still there, but I'm focusing here now more on what might affect how children learn and what influences them. And I've picked out 5 different things. I'll be honest and say partly these 5 different things are here because they are of interest to me. But these things, and as teachers, you need to be aware, I believe, of these different things and the way they potentially impact on pupils' learning. Now, there's a whole thing around gender. I mean, gender has been a topic that's been debated as how do we redress some of the gender imbalance in different parts of design and technology. I would encourage you to see if you can dig out some work by Patricia Murphy, and I cite it in the book. Patricia Murphy did some really interesting stuff. It's a chapter in the book, Gender and Technology, Gender Mediation in School Knowledge and Construction. And I'm actually going to I've got a copy of a chapter from another book that she wrote that's about language and about how teachers talk in design and technology, talk in different ways to boys and to girls, and how that can include and exclude, and how it can make some children feel like the subject is for them or not. A student of mine did some research on it in her classroom, and it was really powerful for her to kind of do that research and reflection on her own practice. But she was a textiles teacher, and she wanted to use what I call a blunt instrument of, well, let's do electronic textiles because that will get girls interested in electronics and that will get boys interested in textiles. But we talked, me and Hope, about the fact that that is kind of quite a blunt instrument, and maybe there's something else behind that about the teacher's approach and what the teacher believes. So thinking about you, the way you talk, what your expectations are, your conscious and subconscious views about different genders is worth thinking about, and how that influences pupils' learning. The next one is about cultural background, and my thinking has moved on quite a bit since I wrote the chapter a couple of years ago. I talk about how the role models that are often used in the classroom in design and technology tend to be white, and they don't tend to be representative of the society that we live in terms of ethnicity and race. And I think that is slowly shifting. And I've done a couple of podcasts about this, and we're currently putting a chapter together for the Debates in D&T book, which is about how do we do race in D&T. I think we're going to be careful that we don't do tokenism about thinking about, well, we need to show designers of different colours and as well as different genders in the classroom. There's reasons why we do it, is because we have to look at the nature of our classroom and the makeup of our classroom, and we might have children of colour in our classroom. If we're showing them everything white, we're not showing them that this is a field that is open to them. But the other danger we have is that we focus on taking things from other cultures and use them in our classroom, but actually doing some misappropriation. So we might be misusing things or not understanding the heritage of things. And so we need to be kind of sensitive to that in terms of thinking about children's background and their cultures. We might also need to think about whether subjects like design and technology are more valued in different cultures. You know, the children that you're teaching are often likely now to be second and third generation of migrants into the country. But obviously, we've now got some children coming in with English as an additional language who are Syrian, and currently more recently from Afghanistan. So they will come in with different perceptions and different views. But how you encourage them and represent them in your classrooms in the language that you use is important. And it's kind of beyond having people of colour represented in the designs that you use. The other thing that I think we need to be careful of is we don't go into white saviour mode. We look at things in developing countries where people have gone in from the West into developing countries and fixed things, and I use inverted commas. It's kind of again a move away from that, very much in charities. So thinking about, it used to be a big thing, and I did it in my classrooms where I'd have projects that were set in countries that were developing, and we would go in and fix it. And I think we need to be very mindful of that and how that comes across in terms of the different children that we have in our classroom, and are we respecting their culture. And then language, how do we use language? Okay, how do we respond to children where English is an additional language? And we've got to be careful that we're not, and I'm sure you don't do this, that we make assumptions about their capacity in design and technology based on their language skill. Okay, and then finally, the next one is about socio and economic background. How do we include, not exclude? We know from research internationally that where there is social deprivation, that access to subjects like design and technology is less. It's not seen as central, and so the subject almost becomes elitist if we're not careful internationally and nationally. I live in a town with a very exclusive private school, where fees are upwards of 30,000, and there's another one just down the road as well, and they have amazing resources, and we know that there is becoming this divide between state and private. And so, we need to be aware. You can't do anything about this, but being aware of these differences. But equally then, taking the children in your classroom, if we're asking them to contribute to things, can they? Do we exclude them if we can't? What are we doing there? And then finally, thinking about motivation and expectation. Just because you enjoy it doesn't mean that they will. And the final section of the chapter, I'd really encourage you to read. It's the longest part, so you can tell that it's kind of like, at that point, my most favourite, because I was really interested in how do we motivate young people in design and technology when they're not interested. Well, one of the simplest ways is we can introduce them to an activity and say, why is this of interest to you? Why is this of value to you? What will you get from this? And sometimes by the very act of writing those things down, the children will get that buy-in and get that motivation to participate in the activity in a more meaningful way. So that's the end of me talking. I've seen a number of people. Well, I can see people making notes, flitting in and out. The next session we're talking is about subject knowledge. I'm going to stop sharing and open the floor if people have got questions, comments, or otherwise. Or not. Or share your experience about progression, planning for progression in your departments. What do you do? How does it go?
While people are thinking about questions, shall I pose one?
Yeah, go on then, go on.
So at the moment, knowledge is such a big thing in the curriculum at the moment. So you talked a lot about capability. So how does knowledge and capability, how do they relate to each other? Where do they overlap? Where are they different?
Well, so capability is about how we respond to a design context and what the resolution is. So I'm talking as if I'm a child, right? So I'm given a design context. I might or might not have to identify the brief. Let's say I'm doing the full thing, right? So I'm going to identify the need, and then I'm going to lead that through to a resolution, a high quality prototype, whatever high quality might seem to me. Okay, so to be able to do that, I have to draw on things that I know to be able to inform my designing, okay, the designs that I come up with. Now that knowledge might be about my understanding of that context, or my understanding about what I was talking to with Dave and James this morning about people, you know, my empathy. So that means that the teacher might have done a session with me, or part of a session with the class, about understanding people. How do we understand what we might use an approach like the pies approach. We might teach them, right, so I'm stepping out, I'm going to move over here, I'm now the teacher, okay, to the pupil, and I'm teaching something like the pies approach. So the pies approach, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social, is not, I don't think that's a pedagogical approach per se. I think actually it's something that designers use, they know about, that people have these different needs. And as a teacher, I can teach it. As a child, I can decide to use it or not use it, depending on where I am in my career. It might be that if you've taught it to me last week, you want me to use it this week. But if I'm in year 10, you might just go, don't forget you've got all these strategies, and the child has to use them. So that's their developing D&T capability. Or it might be that I get so far in my design project and I go, well, I need that to fit to that, and I don't know how that's going to happen. So I have to be taught it, or I have to go and be given the information to access it and understand it. So that's where knowledge to me fits. That's why I struggle with theory lessons, because I think, you know, if we're about developing something so that children can make informed judgment, you know, developing their knowledge to be creative and resolve situations, then it has to be, it kind of, that's where the schema thing comes in for me, where you teach them and it kind of connects. Now it might be, because it connects something you've taught them before, it might be connects because they go, oh yeah, I need to know how to do that, to do this, don't I? That was a beautiful piece of English. I need to know how to do that, to do this, don't I? Yeah. Does that, what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, very, very much so. So it's about doing stuff with knowledge, just rather than just knowing stuff. And actually, as you're talking there, I was thinking about retrieval practice, which is really popular at the moment.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite fit in the sort of D&T model way of thinking as it's commonly presented in schools. But actually, what you're describing there is a form of retrieval practice where pupils are drawing on knowledge that they've got. And they're, so by developing capability, they are retrieving, but sometimes they're not just retrieving, they're going and finding out something themselves.
Yeah. And I think that's why in D&T, really we need to talk about concepts. And it's understanding concepts and big ideas in design and technology. Because actually, what they have is a building, I mean, materials is the easy one to talk about, is I'm not sure all the time the value of doing a lesson about cotton, polyester, and so on, or, you know, my bronze, zinc. I mean, I couldn't even remember what the composition of bronze was. I was like going, do that. I think it took me 3 lessons to go back to these poor kids and go, oh yeah, and I've got it now. But actually, talking about their physical and mechanical properties, cotton is a cool material. Why is it a cool material? Why do I want to wear cool fabric? Why am I wearing I'm going to boast about it, my pure wool hand knitted by me jumper, because it has insulation, and we can talk about insulation, because we want to then use a material that insulates, and we can use that same language. And so we give them those concepts that kind of become the schema that they can attach things to, that when they have a design context, they can go, well, actually, I need this material to be rigid, but I also need to be able to drill into it. So it's got to have some give. It can't be hard, rigid. So then they start to understand about compromise. And that's what the informed judgments are doing, is that they're understanding that they're having to make compromise. That's why their designs, when they finished, are resolutions, not solutions, because they're based on the knowledge they have and the access they have to the materials, the processes, and so on. It's not a finished product, it's a prototype, and it's a resolution for all sorts of reasons. Cool, right, I've really gone off on one.
So
You've got a question?
Here. Yeah, excellent. Do you want me to read it out?
Yeah, go on then.
If you end up in a, from Catherine, thank you, Catherine. If you end up in a school where they don't allow students much autonomy and everyone makes the same things, how can you start to challenge or change that as a new teacher?
Move schools. No.
Become a head of department.
I would do it in your own classrooms in subtle ways. You know, so you could ask that question that I put in that scheme of work right at the start, even though you know what you're going to teach them. What do you think you need to know to be able to do this? You know, so they are more empowered. And to an extent, once the door's closed, you know, as long as there's not many, learning walks going on, you can work within that. But I think that's a really powerful question, is what do you need to know? And asking them questions like, why have you decided? What do you think would happen if you use this rather than that? Does that make sense? If you go on to David Barlick's and Torben Steeg's website, D&T for D&T, and I'll put a link in, and I'm taking quite a lot of this from the Nuffield material. They had these things called capability tasks and design and make projects, and they have this lovely section in there called teacher talk, and they actually give phrases to ask. So I think, Catherine, that the most straightforward way is to plan almost your conversations, your interjections, the big questions that you're going to ask, where you know what the parameters are, if that makes sense, and you can ask deeper questions. Why have you chosen that material? What do you think might work well with that, and what won't work well? Does that matter? Does that make sense? And then I think you've kind of got to do it gradually over time. You kind of got to pick away at it. And I think you've got to ask some difficult questions. Is, you know, this is what Ofsted will be asking you. So what's the curriculum intent? What we're leading towards? I'm just curious to understand where this fits. This activity fits in developing their, you know, helping them meet the aims of the national curriculum for D&T. Catherine, remind me, are you a student teacher, or are you in your first years of teaching?
I'm student teacher, so I've just started my second placement, my short placement. Okay,
so at the moment I would be going, I'm curious why.
Yeah, okay.
You're doing a lot. I'm curious how, as part of my assignment, I need to understand, you know, I'm reflecting on.
Yeah, because
does that make sense?
They're currently on, I'm in textiles on a project where there's no design really at all. It was quite a surprise. So they just get to choose what they put on their pocket, but everything else is just as the teacher instructs. So they're already looking a little bit bored. So I just wondered how you approach things like that.
Yeah, so I'll be asking questions. Yeah, because basically that's just decoration. That's almost an art project. Sorry, I'll uncross my arms, and please don't share this recording beyond anyway. And I think, unfortunately, and I think that is why that comes about, because teachers have become to a point where they're too frightened to take risks for all sorts of legitimate reasons. You know, this is not a reflection on the textiles teacher. It might also be that they don't have the knowledge, the confidence. Okay, and that's why me saying earlier about unpicking your knowledge and the concepts is really important, because then you know, you can start to have those conversations with those teachers, whether it's subtly. So where does this lead to? What's the next thing they do that's more advanced? How is that more advanced? Is textiles your background, Catherine?
Yeah, textiles is my background. And I think my fear now, having seen a second school, is how much of the department you get to see when you go for an interview, and whether you could end up in a school like this without realizing.
So I think if you get a position, you've kind of got to think, I'm in for the long haul. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It can take 3 years to change a curriculum. Okay, I mean, I'm working with a school in London, and you know, we started 15 months ago, and it's incremental, because I'm mentoring the head of department, and you know, she's got people who've been there a long time. So we're just asking questions a lot of the time and making small changes. And I think I would be asking some of those questions about where's your curriculum plan. Now, if they're tapping into the inspection framework, then the school should be talking about those things anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're asking those questions and you've got a deputy head or a head teacher on the interview panel, they'll be biting your hand off.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay. When doing a project like that in textiles, could it not be the focus? Sorry, Matt, you were meant to doing this, but I'll let you read that.
Yeah. Okay, so from Todd, when doing a project like that in textiles, could not be the focuses on the accuracy of making, or maybe later in a scheme of work, a design element comes in. Well, yeah, I mean, as Alison was saying, we've got mainly making activities.
Yeah.
And it's okay to do stuff like that if you've got design in there.
But it's being mindful that you're not doing too much of the mainly making, and that's, I mean, me and Matt talk about that, you know, often a mainly making activity is masquerading as a design project, because that textile teacher might argue that's a design project because they're designing what's going on it. And I would say it's not.
Yeah.
And I would say there's not, yeah, you're right, Catherine, there's not a lot of autonomy. Yeah, Todd, I understand what you're saying about it being exciting to give students some autonomy, but it can lose the focus on the making. Well, what we're making a high quality prototype, or we're making a beautiful finished product. Well, we're not going to make a beautiful finished product. We don't have time or capacity. And I'm going to be really blunt here and say we're not a craft subject. And it's insulting to people who are craftspeople to say that that's what we do in design and technology. And we give an introduction maybe, but that's not what the nature of the subject is about. And it can be a challenge to give autonomy. That's why I kind of talked you through that biodiversity, where you can kind of see we were managing the autonomy by limiting the choices. And we limited the choices partly through the materials as well. Okay. Todd, I can't see you, so I can't see whether I've offended you in any of my comments. So
no. Sorry, not at all.
That's all right then. I'll try harder.
I was just playing a little bit of devil's advocate just to see where the thinking was there, because you know, we do lots of projects, and we've adapted them to free them up from, you know, students not always making the same product as the person next to them, that they have to have choices to make and be able to reason why they're doing that. And that's important, and it gives them more of an investment in what they're doing instead of just following instructions. They actually have choices to make along the way.
Absolutely, and I think it is really important to give them those choices, but you can scaffold those choices. I mean, on the biodiversity, I think Sarah and I planned it that they'd have chicken wire, bamboo, and pine. You know, that was it. You know, so we weren't looking for, you know, so that made it easier for us to manage, made it easier for us to source materials, and by getting them to do it in groups, they were all making the same thing. So we didn't have 25 different projects, we might only have 5 projects going on. So again, it's about thinking about what the focus of the activity is. And if it's all the same, then it's not a mixed diet, which is what Matt argues for in his chapter. I'm conscious about time, that we've gone over time. And I'm also conscious that I've probably absolutely bombarded you with stuff this evening, but hopefully it's been useful. You know where we are if you've got any questions. You've all got Matt's email, Matt. No, you know where we are if you've got any questions, and hopefully things are starting to slot into place. And at this stage in your careers, I'd just be asking a lot of questions. It's always a good one. I'm curious how. I'm curious why. Could you tell me a bit more?
And that other thing that Alison said about baby steps, do bring in a little bits
Yeah.
into your teaching. And that's, as you start to see those wins, then other teachers around you will say, oh, well, that works, that's interesting. Yeah. So yeah, don't try and change things all at one go.
No. Right, folks, it's good to see you all. We'll see you all next time later on in March, Wednesday the 9th of March. And yeah, let us know how you're doing. Let us know if you're applying for jobs, or if you've got a job, so we can celebrate your successes amongst us. That'd be good to know as well. And hopefully we'll see some of you next Tuesday at the research meet. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you. I'm glad you've ordered the book, Todd. I'm not sending you any more chapters.
Hey dear. So, right, I'll stop the video.
Yeah, Todd wrote to me earlier in the day. Oh, so do you want to put in the Google group then about the research meet? Because somebody's just asked.
Oh, right, yeah.
Um,
Okay.